everyone. Welcome back to the Princeton Review daily live stream for advanced placement tests. My name is Gina Donegan, and we're going to be talking about the AP English Language Test. So welcome to all of you. If you're joining me from a prior episode, welcome back. If you're new, then thanks for joining us, and you're welcome to ask any questions that you might have as we go along. As I mentioned, my name is Gina Donegan. I'm an experienced teacher for the Princeton Review. I work with a lot of different tests, including AP tests. And I've been doing this for about 20 years. So I'm going to try to share with you everything I know about getting a high score on the English language test. And along with me are Brian and Tyle. Brian and Tyle will be handling any questions that you might have in the chat field, and they'll also pass on some of your comments and questions to me so that I can answer any of your questions as we go along. So don't be shy. We have a fairly small group. We have time to take questions if you have any. And so let me give you an overview of what we're going to cover today. We're first going to start with a little overview of how the 2020 exam is going to work. So if you feel like you're a little behind on information, we'll review some of that. We'll also talk about some new information that we have about exactly how the 2020 test is going to work. This is information that I didn't have before, and now I can pass it on to you. We're going to talk about the most important things that you need to add to your notes. We did a detailed list of these things in episode 1, but I'm going to really boil it down to the biggest essentials that you need to know today. We're going to talk about what it takes to get a high score, and we're going to look at some example prompts and questions and some example essays. So you can see exactly what a high scoring essay sounds like. And so uh, just a reminder that you will be taking the AP test English language on Wednesday, May 20th. So mark this on your calendar if you don't already have it there. 2 p.m. if you're in the Eastern time zone. If you're not in the Eastern time zone, make sure you know exactly which time you should show up. Um, you'll be taking this on an electronic device, hopefully a laptop or desktop computer. If you don't have a laptop or desktop, it's also possible to handwrite your essay, take a picture of it with your tablet or smartphone, and upload it to the College Board. That's another option. But obviously, you need a good, reliable internet connection. So if you don't have that at home, you'll want to think about where you can be on May 20th, where you might have that good connection. This year's test, because everybody's taking it at home and online, it's a completely different test. We don't have any multiple choice questions, and we don't have multiple essays. We only have one essay. It's the rhetorical analysis essay. And you're going to be given 45 minutes to write that essay and an additional 5 minutes to upload your essay to the College Board. You are allowed any notes that you want. So these can be written notes in a notebook. These can be computer-based notes. And in the first session, I gave you some suggestions as to what to put in your notes. Um, and your notes can be as extensive as you want them to be. If you feel like you're really strapped for time and you just don't have time to create a lot of notes, today I'm going to give you the most essential notes, the things that really everyone should have for this particular exam. And that way, if you need to keep it simple, you can do that. The best thing to do if you have any doubts about the logistics, whether you're registered or how this test is going to work, is to go to the College Board website, collegeboard.org. And there's an area there called My AP where you can log in and see if you are actually registered. Now, here's some exciting new developments that I didn't have for you in some of our prior episodes. The College Board has come out and revealed exactly how this test is going to work. They've actually created a demo of how the tester is going to work. I've given you the link up on the slide here. It's AP 2020 exam demo.collegeboard.org. Now, you do have to be registered for the test. Well, actually, I take that back. You don't necessarily have to be registered, but you do have to provide some personal information in order to log in. I think they're going to actually ask you for some ID. So you might have to input some data, but it'll give you a chance to just kind of see what the tester environment's going to be. Now, the information that we've gotten that we didn't have a few weeks ago is that you will, in fact, be writing your essay on your own computer in your own sort of word processing document. So, most people would be using Microsoft Word, or if you don't have Word, you can use something like Google Docs. You can use almost anything you want, but it does have to be something that's on your computer. And then you will be actually uploading that to the College Board. In the past, we thought that maybe the College Board was going to provide its own word processing environment, but in fact, they're going to rely on you to have your own way to write the essay. This is good news because if you have access to something like Microsoft Word, then it's got spell check, grammar check, um, and it's probably an environment that you're used to. Um, so I would suggest you check out that demo if you have any, reservations about how this is going to work. There's also a really useful document that you can find on the College Board website. Again, it's apcentral.collegeboard.org. And you want to look for something called the AP Testing Guide for 2020. It's a complete guide to how this year's test is going to work. So if you're wondering, well, how am I going to get into the website, or, what kind of equipment do I need? This document really covers everything. So I think it's really helpful. For instance, I found out from the document that you're really best off using the Chrome browser when you're going to do this. There are other browsers that might work, but for the safest, hassle free experience possible, they're actually recommending Chrome. So that's good to know. So those are things you can check out on your own. If you just go to the College Board website, you should be able to do a search or find these things pretty easily, as long as you're in the AP Central part of the website. Now, Dark Spider asked a question: how long is the essay itself? Well, when you say the essay, I'm not sure if you're talking about the essay you're going to write or the essay that they're going to give you as a prompt topic. The essay that they're going to give you as a prompt topic will be a nonfiction piece of writing. This is called rhetorical analysis because what we're doing is we're going to analyze the rhetorical choices that an author of a work of nonfiction uses. And it's a persuasive work, right? So it could be a speech, it could be an essay. The author is going to try to convince you of something, and that's the kind of text that you'll be reading. That text is going to be fairly long. Um, I'd say it's going to be at least 3 paragraphs or so, maybe longer. I think the guideline is somewhere between 500 and 700 words, but you know, that's just a guideline, right? Some of them might be a little shorter. But your essay should be as long as you can make it. Okay. Because if you want to get the highest score possible, you want to make full use of your 45 minutes. You don't want to waste a lot of time just sitting there reading and thinking. Now, obviously, we have to do some reading and obviously, we have to do some thinking, but the faster you can get started in writing your essay, the better. Because longer essays do tend to get higher scores. Now, if you called up the College Board and asked them, they would probably say, well, there's no required length, right? And technically that's true. But I just find that if you look at prior tests and you look at scores that people got, almost invariably the people who wrote more tended to get higher scores. So hopefully that answers your question. But if I misunderstood your question, let me know. So it's great that we have updated information and you still have about 12 days to prepare for this, right? So we don't have to panic, right? It's coming up soon, but you still have a significant amount of time to organize your notes. And by the way, when you go to the demo, they're actually going to provide you with some sample prompts. So if you feel like you need more practice, you can get official practice from the College Board when you go to that demo. And for those of you who might have just come in, my name is Gina Donegan. We are talking about the AP English Language Test. So you're welcome to sit and listen, but you can also ask questions if you have any. You can type those into the chat field, and Tile will pass those on to me. So I know some of you are very concerned about the scoring rubric. How do we score points on this test? Well, what we know is that the rhetorical analysis essays will definitely be scored on a scale of 1 to 6. Technically, it's 0 to 6, but most people don't get zeros. But I want to make you aware that if you are handwriting your essay and you take a photo copy of it and upload it to the College Board, you want to make sure that that picture of your essay is very clear. Because if it's not very clear, you could either get a zero or you could be expected to have to take it again on the makeup date in June. And that's not a good thing, right? So we don't want to get zeros due to, bad pictures of the essay. That's why typing is a good option if you can do that instead. Annabelle says, is there a word count? I can't give you a word count, Annabelle. Again, it's just write as much as you can, okay? Because the people who get the highest scores use almost all the time to write. Okay, the people who get the highest scores are not writing their essays in 25 minutes and sitting there for the remaining 15 minutes. So, the more the better. But I'm going to show you a very high scoring essay today, and that's going to give you a really clear sense of how much you might need to write, or at least what you're aiming for. So, back to the scoring rubric, you'll be scored on a scale of 1 to 6, but your ultimate AP score will actually be on a scale of 1 to 5. So, it's a little unclear to us exactly how they're going to make that conversion between the 1 to 6 and the 1 to 5, but ultimately, we would just want to score as many points as possible. So, here's what you need to do to get a maximum of 6. First of all, you must have a decent thesis. If it's not clear what point you're trying to argue, you will miss this point. And the most common place that people express a thesis is in the introduction, specifically in the last sentence of the introduction. So if you want to make it easy for the grader to know what your thesis is, put it there. Technically, you could put it somewhere else, but why make it difficult, right? We just want to make it really easy for the grader to look at our essay and say, oh, this is a 6. And your thesis has to be, fairly specific. It can't be so general and bland that anybody could prove it, right? It's got to be something that requires a little bit of work to prove. Um, and the thesis that we're writing always comes down to one thing, which is analyzing the rhetorical choices that the author of the passage used. That's it. So, unlike other tests where sometimes the question varies, the question doesn't really vary on this test. It's always about rhetorical choices. And if you don't know exactly what I mean by rhetorical choices, I'm going to be a little more specific with you on the next slide. The bulk of your points, up to actually 4 points, come from this evidence and commentary. Now, keep in mind, it's not an all or nothing. It's not like you score 4 points or you score 0. You could score 1, 2, 3, or 4 points for these things. But of course, we want to score 4 if we can. So, in order to score in this category, you have to provide specific evidence to support all the claims that you make. All the claims, right? So, you can't just sort of put out an idea. If you're going to put out an idea, you have to make sure you've proved it with evidence. Evidence usually means direct quoting, but it could involve some paraphrasing. So you can do a combination of the two. I find that the highest scoring essays always involve some direct quotes. They don't have to be long quotes. As a matter of fact, it's better if they're not. 10 words or less is a good guideline. But then, this is important. You also need commentary. Think of commentary as explanation. So you've just provided your evidence. Now you're going to explain exactly how the evidence supports your line of reasoning. And remember, your line of reasoning always has to do with rhetorical choices. So Valiumi asks, what about the 1 to 6? Yes, Valiumi, what I mentioned earlier is that the essay scoring will go on a scale of 1 to 6. However, that will then be converted to the normal AP scoring, which is 1 to 5. Honestly, I'm still a little vague on how they're going to do that, but you know, essentially what they're doing is they're taking the normal rubric and then they're just going to convert it to 1 to 5 afterwards. So we can't really know exactly how that's going to work. For instance, do you need to get a 6 in order to get a 5? Unknown. Maybe you could get a 5 and still get a 5. That we're still a little unsure of that. But, obviously you're not aiming to get anything except a maximum score. Everybody wants a maximum score. Um, but in order to even get a decent score, which let's say on a scale of 1 to 5 would be like a 3, right? In order to get that, you still have to aim for doing most of these things. Um, Stephen asks a good question. Do you have to state which line you got each quote from? No, you don't. You could refer to a paragraph, like in the first paragraph, the author says X, or at the end of the essay, the author says X, but it's not necessary that you be exact because the grader's going to know whether it was in there or not. So, if you want to be really precise, you can, but it's not necessary. Okay, so the key to getting the 4 points is that you explain multiple rhetorical choices. My advice to you is at least 3, but you could go higher than 3. Um, and then there's one more point that you could potentially score. A lot of people call this the sophistication point. In order to score the sophistication point, well, there are actually a couple of ways you can do it. One is to have a somewhat complex thesis. If your thesis seems a little more complex than the average person's thesis, and if you successfully prove that point, that thesis, then you could score the sophistication point. But you can also get the sophistication point by having a really good writing style. Now, when it comes to complexity of the thesis, what do I mean by that? Well, it often comes down to things like complexities or tensions within the piece of writing, oppositions, maybe even paradoxes, things that might not seem to go together, but you're going to explain how they go together. That's often what a complex thesis comes down to. Good writing style is really about reasonably sophisticated vocabulary and somewhat complex sentence structure. We don't want the writing to be so complicated that the grader has a trouble understanding what you're saying, right? That's not a good thing. So don't be deliberately highfalutin to the point where like the grader's wondering what you're talking about. That's not sophistication. That's just annoying, right? But I'm going to show you an example today of an essay that did score the sophistication point, and you can see kind of what that entails. So there's the scoring rubric. Now let's talk about the biggest essentials. There are lots of things you could put in your notes, and I gave you some of those things in episode 1. But let's say you're down to the wire and you're thinking, well, I don't have a lot of time to put into prep. Just give me the goods. Just give me the most important stuff. Well, what I have on this slide is the most important stuff. Okay, so if you want to just take a screenshot of this slide, um, if I was taking the test on Wednesday, May 20th, here's what I would do. I would take a screenshot of this slide and I would have this in front of me the entire time that I'm writing the essay. I call these essential talking points. You don't have to cover all of these things in one essay, but the more of these you can refer to, the better, the higher your score will most likely be. In episode 2, we talked about 4 of these basic things. We talked about the author, the audience, the purpose, and the context. So those are really important. Some of you may have learned this in a different way. Your English teacher may have referred to this as SOAP or SOAPs. So those are 5 of the essentials. The speaker is the author, right? The person who wrote the speech or wrote the text. The occasion is the context. When or where is this speech being given? Or what is going on in the history of the environment when the author is writing it? The audience is whoever the author is writing to. What you need to ask yourself is, what are the beliefs, values, and needs of the audience? Because that's going to affect how the author writes the piece. P is for purpose. What is the author trying to accomplish? And S is subject. That just means, what is this about? So think of that as the author's thesis, not necessarily your thesis in your essay, but the author's thesis. But I have some other things on the slide too. Some of you may have seen this word in your English class, the word exigence. It's kind of a tough word. A lot of people don't know this word, but the College Board likes this word. You don't necessarily have to use this word in your essay, but it's possible that you might see the word pop up in the directions for your essay prompt. That's possible. And even if you don't use the word exigence in your writing, you should be thinking about it. Now, what is exigence? Think of exigence as motivation. So, what was it that actually made the author sit down and write this essay? Or what was it that, motivated the author to make a speech? It's not exactly the same as purpose, right? Because purpose is, what am I trying to convince you of? How do I want to influence you? Exigence is more like, what happened to me or what happened in the environment that made me want to create this piece of writing. So again, you don't have to use the word in your essay, but it's good to know what it is. And if you want to use the word, excellent, because I think most of the graders will assume that you would have learned this word in your class. Stephen asked something about Deus ex machina, which stands for God in the machine. I don't think of that as a rhetorical device, Stephen. I mean, maybe you could give me more detail on what you mean by that. Maybe there's an alternative term for that. Um, so I certainly wouldn't put that on my list of necessary rhetorical devices. Okay. But there may be another word for what you're describing. So if you want to give me more on that, let me know. Okay. Then what else do I have on my list? Claims and evidence. You need to show that you notice these things because all of these texts, essay, speech, whatever it is, there's always a claim or multiple claims. And hopefully the author gives us evidence. Otherwise, it's probably not a very good text. Now, the evidence isn't going to be like the kind of evidence that you would see in a court case, right? That's not what I mean by evidence. The evidence is really rhetorical strategies that we're going to talk about. Stephen asks, should we mention if the writing is modernist, neoclassical, romantic, mass market? To me, that sounds like fiction, Stephen. This is always nonfiction. Now, it could be something modern or it could be something old, sure. But I think of those terms as more connected with fiction. So I don't think you'd have to work those in. Or, even poetry could be of those types, right? But typically, nonfiction persuasive essays or speeches wouldn't fall into those categories. Okay, what about structure and organization? What happened at the beginning? What happened in the middle? What happened at the end? Look for transitions throughout the piece of work. How did the author shift from one idea to another? Now, what about really specific literary devices? Well, there's a number of them. I gave you a bunch in episode 1, but here are the most important ones: diction, which is word choice; syntax, which is grammar. This just means, how did the author actually construct the sentences? Sometimes that's to make an idea persuasive. For instance, repetition of ideas could be part of syntax. You have comparisons, which could be similes or metaphors. The overall tone and style is always worthwhile mentioning. Now, tone and style might seem a little vague, but if you just show the grader that you noticed, like, hey, this thing has a tone or a style, you've already scored some points for that, even if, you might think it's kind of a bland tone. And then the last thing I have on my list is modifiers, counter arguments, or alternative perspectives. What this means is, did the author use any opposite opinions to try to prove the point? We would call this a straw man argument. Some authors do this, and when they do, it's persuasive because the author is getting you to think about the opposing idea and is saying, hey, that's really not true. What I'm saying is true, right? So that's a rhetorical device. A modifier is when an author might make a slight change to the position. For instance, if it's a really extreme position, the author might give you a little caveat like, well, it's not always true. This is when perhaps it's not. So that makes the position perhaps more reasonable to the reader or the listener. Okay, Random Channel has a question. So to say, would background information on the prompt beforehand help accomplish exigence? Yes. And here's the cool thing. Sometimes they give you some of that exigence in the introduction. So you always want to read the little introductions that they give you because they're going to tell you typically who the author is. They might tell you who the audience is. You might be able to get most of the soaps just by reading the introduction. We actually did that in episode 2. So don't skip the introduction, whatever you do. Steven says, could you make an entire paragraph on tone? Absolutely. Tone could be its own rhetorical device for sure. Okay, so if anybody has any other questions, you're welcome to type those in. But what we're going to do now is we're going to actually look at a sample prompt passage. And we're also going to look at a sample essay that was written on this topic. So if you want to get a sense of what other people write for the rhetorical analysis essay, you're going to want to maybe even take notes on some of these. So the text that we're going to read here, and by the way, my slide says 40 minutes. That's wrong because it's actually 45 minutes, and it doesn't count for 1/3 of your score. It's the entire score. But I grabbed this from a prior AP test, so that's why those directions say that. But let's look at the introduction they give us. In 1880, 9 years after he created the greatest show on earth, circus promoter P.T. Barnum wrote a short book about making money. He became wealthy himself and believed that anyone could do the same if they would only follow the simple rules he had learned. Read the passages carefully. Then, in a well developed essay, analyze the rhetorical strategies Barnum uses to convey his point of view. So there's the question right at the end. That question is basically the same for every one of these. So, of course, you want to read it, but don't expect that they're going to ask for anything other than rhetorical strategies. That's always what they're asking for. Now, when we look at this introduction, we should be able to get a lot of our soaps, or as we talked about it in episode 2, I said author, audience, purpose, and context. But soaps is pretty much the same thing because the speaker is the author. So who is our speaker or author? He's P.T. Barnum. Now, even if you've never heard of Barnum and Bailey's circus, although you might have heard of it, um, we do know that he must have been sort of successful at this, somewhat successful at it. He was a businessman, right? It says he became wealthy. So right away, we establish some ethos, right? Ethos is authority. This guy is an expert on making money, and he's writing a book about it. Now, who is his audience? Well, what we do know is that he believed anyone could do the same. Okay. So he's not going to be speaking to people who are already wealthy. He's speaking to everyone. Um, and what about context or equate occasion? Well, we don't know much about that. I mean, we do know that this is written 9 years after he started the circus. So he's already established, but that's really all we know. Although you might have a little bit of outside knowledge about 1880. 1880 was a time when there were a lot of people in business making a lot of money. We often call this the beginning of the Gilded Age, where there was a lot of wealth being created in the United States. So that could be part of our context or occasion. And we obviously know his purpose, which is to teach people how to make money. Okay. So you can get most of the soaps just from the introduction, but obviously we have to read the text in order to know more about the subject and to know more about rhetorical devices. Stephen asks, should we mention how he uses old language from the 1880s? He probably will. Yeah. Now, the question though is old language a rhetorical strategy? Probably not, right? Because he's writing to people in 1880. So to them, it might not seem like unusual writing, right? So yes, he's probably going to have some archaic turns of phrase. Maybe there are some words that might be a little unusual, but the real issue is what effect does that have on the listener or the reader? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Uh, so let's take a look at the text. And first, we'll read the introduction that comes before the text. So this says it's an excerpt from The Art of Money Getting or Golden Rules for Money Making. So we already know what his purpose is, right? And in paragraph 2, Dr. Franklin refers to Benjamin Franklin, the founding father who promoted the virtues of thrift and frugal living. Mr. Micawber is the chronic debtor in Charles Dickens' novel David Copperfield. Furbelows shows showy, basically useful ruffles on women's dresses. And in paragraph 4, a bunghole is a hole in a barrel capped with a cork. Okay, so what do we have here already? We have allusions. Allusions are references to things from literature, popular culture, things that the average reader might or might not know about. But allusions are actually a type of rhetorical device. So let's read it. It's actually going to be 2 slides long. So what I'm going to do is give you about 2 minutes or so to read the first slide. You might want to take out some scratch paper as you're reading. Write down any rhetorical devices that you notice. And then I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read the second slide, and then we'll talk about it together. You can start. So now, after reading it, we know more about the subject of this essay. How is he trying to persuade people that they can make money or become wealthy? Well, primarily by trying to show us or tell us that, just saving money on little things isn't necessarily a good strategy, And finally, at the end of the text, we really get the thesis, which is true economy consists in always making the income exceed the outgo. So he's saying, look, you have to think bigger, right? Don't just think about saving your candle ends. You have to think in terms of making more money and, yes, spending less, but it all comes down to the final equation, right? Don't trick yourself into thinking you're being, that thriftiness is actually going to lead to wealth, because it won't necessarily work. Um, and then Stephen asks, what effect do the illusions have on the reader? Well, that's the question, right? So hopefully, as we read the sample essay, we'll see something about that. Now, you don't have to talk about illusions, right? It's not necessary for you to talk about everything that's in there. But if you do mention illusions, yes, you have to point out what effect this might have on the reader. So, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a sample essay that was written on this prompt. And I'll tell you up front that this essay is pretty decent, but it didn't get the highest score possible. So, as we read it, I want to try to figure out, what was good about it, but maybe what this author could have done better. So, this also takes up 2 slides. So, just go ahead and read the first slide on your own, and then I will bring up the second slide. And as you go along, maybe take some notes and try to figure out what you think was good or bad about this essay, and then we'll talk about it together. Okay, hopefully you got a chance to read most of that. Now, if we just take a broad overview of the essay, first of all, it's pretty long, which is great. It actually has how many paragraphs? One, two, three, four. Wow, it actually has 7 paragraphs. That's pretty amazing. You don't necessarily have to write this much, but this person really ran with it. So that would save this from getting a low score or even an average score. This is a pretty good essay. It's above average. I just can't say that it's going to get a maximum score, and we'll take a look at why. First of all, you might have noticed that the verb tenses are a little weird in the introduction. Circus promoter P.T. Barnum wanted to do more than entertain people. He wants to teach them how to make money. It might seem a little minor, but it happens right at the beginning of the essay. So we sense that maybe the writing style, might be a little irregular. But we do have a pretty good list of the rhetorical devices that the author is going to talk about. Um, but I would say yeah, okay, so we'll leave it at that. We have a long list of things. Paragraph 2 seems to be focusing on telling stories. Barnum tells the story of the woman with the candle. Okay, that's pretty solid. Paragraph 3 is really focusing on ethos, that Barnum is a successful businessman, therefore he has authority in this area. Then the next paragraph talks about stories again. Now, it seems like that paragraph should have probably been combined with paragraph 2, right? Because they're both about stories. We do have one of the allusions to Mr. Macabre, although the author doesn't actually refer to it as an allusion. We're missing the part about allusions, right? We don't have any mention of Benjamin Franklin here, I don't think, or if there is, it's kind of brief somewhere. The next paragraph is establishing that Barnum has credibility with the audience. Now, that's ethos again. So why wasn't that combined with paragraph 3? That would have made more sense, right? Then the next paragraph is about cheering on the audience. That's a little bit of a weak paragraph. It probably should have been worked into another paragraph. Then the author's talking about using simple language to convey simple lessons. That would be diction. Um, so it's a little bit disorganized. You might also notice that there aren't a lot of quotes here. There are a few, but not perhaps too many, because the question is, where is the author of this essay getting these things? It's not really clear to us. So it's a decent essay. Again, I don't mean to say this is a bad essay, but it is missing a few things that we would expect to see in a really top essay. So just to summarize, this author probably should have focused more on purpose, audience, and context a little bit more. It was mentioned, but it wasn't a big focus. Um, I'm not sure if there was a reference to Franklin or not, but there really should have been, because Benjamin Franklin is a good example of not only an allusion, but an example of ethos. The author is building credibility by referring to a respected founding father. Um, the introduction does establish P.T. Barnum's ethos. Actually, that's established several times throughout the essay. That's a good thing. However, it probably should have been its own paragraph. And we do have those occasional problems with grammar, even though generally the writing style is pretty decent. So if your goal is to just do a solid job on the English language test, that essay is a good model of what you can do, right? It's not unattainable. It's not written in an incredibly fancy style. So it's solid. But if you're one of those people who really wants to get a 5, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you an example of an essay that got a 5. So we'll look at sort of the ultimate example of what you can do with the AP English language essay. Ray, let's see, Ray had a couple of comments. Ray found metaphors, antithesis, colloquialism, and idioms. Thumbs up, Ray. Great job. And if you want to expound on that, feel free. Those are really excellent. Sounds like Ray is itching for a 5. Colloquialism is just using common expressions, turns of phrase, and you could work that into audience, right? Because P.T. Barnum's trying to appeal to a sort of everyman audience. He's not talking to other wealthy people. So colloquialisms would be a good choice. And idioms, kind of the same thing. Ray also said this author did not appear to have many transitions. Yeah, that's why it feels disorganized, right? Because the author's going from one thing to another. It has 7 paragraphs, which is probably too much, right? You really only need 5 paragraphs. Some of these things should have been combined, and there should have been transitions between the ideas to make it more organized. Ray says he mainly lists and elaborates upon rhetorical strategies, but doesn't connect them back to the thesis. Yeah, really good point, right? Really good point. So now let's take a look at the really good one. And this particular topic is, or this particular excerpt is a lot shorter. This is probably a little shorter than what you would see on your test, but part of why I picked this is because it fits on one slide, so it's easier for us to read. But it is the type of prompt that you could possibly see. Just be aware that most of them are a little bit longer than this. Let's read the introduction. It says in the following passage, author George Orwell, you may have heard of him, author of 1984, assesses the actions of Indian anti colonial political activist Mohandas Gandhi. You might have heard of him also. Gandhi engaged in a hunger strike in order to raise public awareness for his cause. So we have a little background there. Read the passage carefully, write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Orwell makes to convey his message to his audience. So we have to figure out what that message is and obviously look for the rhetorical choices. So take a minute, grab your scratch paper, and just write down as many things that as you can find here. And you can feel free to type those into the chat field. So Orwell's taking kind of an unorthodox approach here, right? We usually think of Gandhi as this saint-like figure who could do no wrong. He was working toward a noble cause, which is all true, right? But Orwell's taking a little bit more of a critical stance, right? He's pointing out that Gandhi had these high ideals, and in the process of trying to execute on his high ideals, that perhaps he was sort of going too far, right? It points out that Gandhi might have almost starved his wife and children, putting pressure on them to engage in the hunger strike. Um, and the case that Orwell is generally trying to make is that to be human is not to be perfect, right? That sometimes you commit a sin, sometimes you do things wrong, sometimes you don't achieve the ultimate, in your ideals, and that's okay. He says the essence of being human is that one does not seek perfection, that one is sometimes willing to commit sins for the sake of loyalty, that one does not push asceticism. Asceticism is when you deny yourself any luxuries in life. One does not push asceticism to the point where it makes friendly intercourse impossible. And it even says at the end, sainthood is also a thing that human beings must avoid. So he's actually criticizing Gandhi, which is kind of surprising, but That, of course, is the persuasive message the author is trying to give us. The question is, has the author done a good job of convincing us of that? Um, Ray says he found chiasmus. Ooh, that's a good one. Love means nothing. What's that line? Let's see. Love means not sure where that. Oh yeah, here it is. Line 10. Love means nothing if it does not mean loving some people more than others. Chiasmus is not a term that most people would know. So if you were able to work that into your essay, that would be really impressive. And he also says the repetition of the word love is central to the argument. That's a good point because the average reader is going to like the word love, right? And by setting it up as though Gandhi is not acting on behalf of love, that certainly helps to persuade us that Gandhi was, a little misguided or off. Stephen says, alluding to an equilibrium with regards to how far religion has to go both intransigence and agreement with Gandhi. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's too strong to say that Orwell was opposed to Gandhi's goals, right? Doesn't say that. He's really just saying that he opposes Gandhi's approach, that it was sort of too extreme, and that maybe we shouldn't think of Gandhi as this, noble saint. Maybe he was actually sort of taking it too far. Interesting. Okay, now we're going to look at an essay that was written on this topic. And I told you before that this is a great essay. This essay got a maximum score. You might even think, "Oh no, do I have to do all of this to just to get a perfect score?" Not necessarily. Okay, this is just an example of what can be done with an English language essay. Let's start with the introduction. The author starts with a quote, a hook. Anytime you can make the introduction interesting to the grader, that's always a good thing. Perfect human beings are like the perfect silk that can be destroyed by a single drop of water, claims author Simon Jacobson. I've never heard of that quote before, but the person who wrote this essay knew of that quote. Now, what are the chances that you're going to be able to pull out a quote that's relevant to the topic? I don't know. It depends on how many quotes you know, right? Maybe 50-50. You don't have to start your essay with a quote, but if you think of one that you think might be relevant, use it because it's a great hook. And then the author of this essay is even using like a metaphor. It is the twig that bends against adversity that survives. If a twig cannot bend, it will break. Cool. So even if you don't think you can start your essay with a quote, you might be able to start it with a metaphor. George Orwell sees the yin and yang of the universe and understands that humans are impure by design. And then here's the thesis statement. The ability to discriminate is a great talent. Oh, sorry, that's not the thesis statement. The last sentence. Orwell's criticism of Gandhi's inability to see this is very effective through his use of detail, reference to the common man, and juxtaposition. So notice how that thesis statement, first of all, references the subject, which is Orwell's criticism of Gandhi. If you didn't get that reading this, your score is going to be lacking. And it's also listing off three major rhetorical devices. You really only need three. Okay. If you have more than three, you might be able to work them in, but you can write a really great essay by essentially just talking about three things. Now, you should have more than three pieces of evidence, right? But you only really need about three rhetorical devices. So let's take a look at the first body paragraph. Right out of the gate, the author is referring to tone. Remember the list of essential talking points that I gave you. Tone was one of them. Orwell's serious tone can be taken from many examples of detail. Now we have a quote. Remember, the previous essay I showed you really didn't have enough quotes. Now, this quote is a little bit long. It didn't have to be that long, but it's good that we have some evidence. And it talks about how Gandhi did not believe that human life was the most important object, a view which is extreme. Any reader would be biased. Okay, so if you want to get points for analysis, you have to refer to the reader or the listener and how the reader or listener would be affected by what the author says. That's key. Otherwise, you're only telling us what the author said, and that's not enough. And then it gives us some more quotes. Orwell is pushing his view that Gandhi is an aberration. Good vocabulary in this essay. That's one of the reasons why it got a perfect score. So that's body paragraph 1. Let's look at body paragraph 2. See how long it is, right? This is a really long essay. This person wrote for the entire probably 40 minutes at least. This person just kept on writing. That's always a good thing. And we have more essential talking points, the audience. By referring to the audience as a foil to the reasoning of Gandhi, that's a good way to put it. Orwell is trying to detach the reader from the possibility. So we have not only essential talking points, but we have reference to how it affects the reader or the listener. Orwell is pushing a sharp, I think that should have been contrast, not contract, between Gandhi and the expectations of the views that society holds. More quotes. Orwell established trust with his audience, more audience. Um, and his audience, of course, is the common man. So we're not going to read this entire paragraph, but you can see there are quotes, there are references to the audience, what effect it has on the audience. That's all really important. And it's a super long paragraph. How about body paragraph 3? Now we're going to talk about juxtaposition, another rhetorical device. Orwell's use of juxtaposition helps to augment the averse reactions to the readers, more high level vocab. Referring to chicken broth, that's interesting. That's kind of a minor detail, but it does have an effect on you when you read it because you think, why would you make a big deal about chicken broth? That's silly. Um, of course, the reader will ask himself or herself, would I let my child or lover die for soup? Every answer is no. So, in every single paragraph, this essay writer is showing us what effect something has on the reader. And then mentions the juxtaposition of sainthood with human vices. That happens at the end. By using juxtaposition, Orwell helps the reader disagree with Gandhi as much as he does. So, over and over again, rhetorical devices and what effect they have on the reader. Now, this is a good conclusion. Good cannot exist without evil. Without evil, humans could not see good. A wise man once said, one cannot appreciate the view from the top of a mountain if he has never been in the valley. Is that a real quote? I don't know, but it works really well in this essay, right? So you could even make up quotes if you think you can do that. Um, the entire conclusion is big picture, and it talks about Orwell, the author. Um, it's a little bit of a lame last sentence, but that's okay. The rest of this essay was super awesome. So, this is the gold standard. If you want to get a perfect score, this is what you need to do. But don't be intimidated. You don't have to be quite this fantastic or write quite this much to still get a solid score. We're just about coming to an end here, but I want to thank you all for joining me for this series of live streams. I also want to mention that on Monday, we're going to have a live stream at 1 p.m. Eastern Time about SAT, ACT, and college admissions in the age of coronavirus, something a lot of you are probably wondering about. So if you want some info, join us on Monday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll talk about that. And Ashley has one more question. Any good examples of essays earning the row C point for sophistication? Ashley, this is an example of that. Okay. This is sophisticated. You don't have to be more sophisticated than this, but if you are, then fantastic. Ray says, when the author says contract instead of contrast, will the grader understand that he meant contrast? Yeah, some minor spelling or grammar mistakes will not keep you from getting a perfect score. That was a pretty minor error. Riley, you have 45 minutes to write the essay, a full 45 minutes, and then you have 5 minutes to upload it. How do you annotate without a printer? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Oh, Riley, are you thinking you're going to handwrite your essay? Okay, you can handwrite your essay, and what you would do is you would take a screen up, you would take a picture of it with your um, smartphone or tablet, and you would upload that to the College Board. But I wouldn't suggest that you do that unless you don't have access to a laptop or desktop computer. It's really better to just write it in a Word document. That's going to be a lot easier. So that way you're not doing any physical annotating at all. Oh, maybe you're talking about underlining in the text itself. Okay, now I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, you won't be able to do that, Riley. Unfortunately, you'll have to take notes on your scratch paper. So, thank you all for your brilliant questions, and I wish you the best of luck on the AP English language test. Don't forget to check out PrincetonReview.com if you want more help with this. Have a good afternoon, everyone.